Nazi medical experiments. Between 1942 and 1945, Nazi doctors conducted medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners without consent. At least 15,754 victims were documented. 1/4 were killed. Survivors suffered severe permanent injuries. The experiments were ordered by Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler and carried out by doctors including Josef Mengele, Sigmund Rascher, and Karl Klauberg at camps including Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück. At Dachau, Sigmund Rascher conducted freezing experiments. Prisoners were submerged in tanks of ice water for up to 5 hours. Others were strapped down naked in freezing outdoor temperatures. Their body temperatures dropped as low as 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Doctors monitored them as they foamed at the mouth and lost consciousness. Rewarming methods included boiling water. Rascher also conducted high-altitude experiments using low-pressure chambers simulating altitudes up to 68,000 feet. It was reported that Rascher dissected the brains of some victims while they were still alive. Of 200 subjects, 80 died during the experiments. The rest were executed. At Auschwitz, Josef Mengele experimented on twins. At least 582 twins were subjected to his research. Mengele collected blood samples and conducted procedures including injecting chemicals into children's eyes, attempting to change their color. Of approximately 1,000 pairs of twins, only about 200 pairs survived. Karl Klauberg conducted sterilization experiments. About 700 women were successfully sterilized. Many others died or suffered permanent injuries. Other experiments included amputating limbs without anesthesia, rubbing ground glass into infected wounds, and forcing prisoners to drink only seawater until they were so dehydrated they licked freshly mopped floors. In 1947, 23 Nazi doctors were tried at the doctors' trial. 15 were found guilty. 7 were hanged. The vast majority were never prosecuted. The trial led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code, establishing informed consent as the foundation of modern medical ethics. Unit 731. Between 1936 and 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army operated a covert biological warfare facility in Pingfang, Manchuria. Officially called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, it was known as Unit 731. Led by Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, the facility conducted experiments on live human subjects. Prisoners were called Maruda, Japanese for logs, based on the cover story that the facility was a lumber mill. Most victims were Chinese civilians. Others included Russians, Koreans, children, and pregnant women. At least 14,000 people were killed inside the facility. An estimated 200,000 to 580,000 more died from biological weapons tested in the field. Thousands of prisoners were subjected to vivisection without anesthesia. They were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid. While still alive, their organs were removed to study disease progression before decomposition. Physiologist Yoshimura Hisato conducted frostbite experiments. Prisoners' limbs were submerged in ice water until frozen solid. When struck with a stick, the frozen limbs made a sound like hitting a wooden board. Yoshimura tested different rewarming methods, including scalding water, open fire, or leaving victims untreated overnight. Unit 731 developed biological weapons for field deployment. Plague-infected fleas were bred and dropped from aircraft over Chinese cities. Water supplies were contaminated with cholera and typhoid. At least 11 cities were attacked. In 1940, an attack on Ningbo killed over 100 people within days. A 1941 attack on Changde resulted in approximately 10,000 biological casualties. In August 1945, as Soviet forces approached, all remaining prisoners were killed to eliminate witnesses, and the facility was destroyed. Lieutenant General Ishii and most staff were granted immunity from prosecution by the United States in exchange for research data. Unlike the Nuremberg trials for Nazi doctors, no major war crimes tribunal was held. Ishii died peacefully in 1959. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service, in collaboration with Tuskegee University in Alabama, began a study on untreated syphilis. The study enrolled 600 impoverished African-American sharecroppers from Macon County. Of these, 399 had syphilis, and 201 served as controls. The men were never told they had syphilis. Researchers told them they were receiving treatment for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. In exchange for participation, they were promised free medical care, meals, and burial insurance. In reality, they received placebos disguised as medicine. The true purpose was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis until death and autopsy. The study was initially planned for 6 months. but it continued for 40 years. In 1947, penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis. Researchers withheld it from participants. They actively prevented the men from accessing treatment elsewhere. During World War II, 256 infected men registered for the draft. Military doctors diagnosed them with syphilis and ordered treatment. Study researchers blocked their treatment, depriving them of both a cure and military service. When public health programs opened treatment centers to eradicate syphilis, researchers prevented study participants from attending. The study continued even after the 1947 Nuremberg Code and the 1964 Declaration of Helsinki established protections for research subjects. In 1969, the Centers for Disease Control reviewed the study and decided to continue. The study ended in 1972 when Peter Buxton, a public health service investigator, leaked information to the press. The New York Times published it on the front page. By then, only 74 of the original 399 infected men were alive. 28 had died directly from syphilis. 40 wives had been infected because the men were never told they carried the disease. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1974, a lawsuit resulted in a $10 million settlement. Congress passed the National Research Act requiring informed consent. In 1997, President Bill Clinton formally apologized, but no one was ever prosecuted. MK Ultra. Between 1953 and 1973, the Central Intelligence Agency conducted an illegal mind control program called MK Ultra. Led by chemist Sidney Gottlieb, the program aimed to develop interrogation techniques for the Cold War. It involved more than 150 sub-projects at over 80 institutions including universities, hospitals, and prisons. The program administered LSD and other drugs to thousands of unwitting subjects. In 1953, the CIA purchased the entire world supply of LSD for $240,000. Targets included prisoners, mentally ill patients, drug addicts, and prostitutes, people who could not fight back. One mental patient in Kentucky received LSD for 174 consecutive days. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA operated brothels in San Francisco. Men were secretly dosed with LSD. The brothels had one-way mirrors and sessions were filmed. The men were too embarrassed to report it. In Canada, psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron conducted experiments at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute from 1957 to 1964, funded by the CIA. Cameron administered electroshock at up to 67 times normal power. He placed patients in drug-induced comas, lasting up to 3 months, while playing repetitive messages. Many entered with minor issues like anxiety. They left with permanent brain damage, unable to speak or recognize their parents. In November 1953, Army biochemist Frank Olson was given LSD without his knowledge. 9 days later, he fell from a 13th-story window. His death was ruled suicide from LSD-induced depression. Cranial injuries indicated he had been knocked unconscious before he fell. The death was ruled a homicide. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed. Sidney Gottlieb personally drove to the Records Center to ensure their destruction. In 1975, the Church Committee revealed the program to the public, but no one was ever prosecuted. Willowbrook Hepatitis Study. Between 1956 and 1971, researchers conducted hepatitis experiments on children with intellectual disabilities at Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York. The institution was designed for 4,000 residents but held over 6,000 by 1965. Conditions were overcrowded and unsanitary. Senator Robert F. Kennedy called it a snake pit, where residents lived in filth and dirt, in rooms less comfortable than cages in a zoo. Dr. Saul Krugman of New York University and Dr. Robert W. McCollum of Yale University deliberately infected over 700 children with live hepatitis virus. Researchers fed children hepatitis obtained from stool samples of infected children. They watched as the children's skin and eyes turned yellow, their livers enlarged, and they vomited and refused to eat. All children fed the virus became ill. The natural hepatitis infection rate at Willowbrook was 30 to 50%. By deliberately infecting children, researchers increased that rate to 100%. Krugman claimed the experiments were justified because children lived in better conditions in the research unit and might benefit from immunity. In 1964, Willowbrook closed to new admissions due to overcrowding. The only available spaces were in the hepatitis research unit. Parents who wanted to place their children at the institution were told admission was only possible through the study. Many had no other options for caring for their disabled children. Consent letters used deceptive language, calling the research a new form of prevention, without stating children would be deliberately infected. Over 1,000 adults worked at Willowbrook. None were used in experiments. In 1972, journalist Geraldo Rivera exposed the facility's conditions in Willowbrook, the last great disgrace. Public outrage led to a lawsuit and federal legislation. The Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act passed in 1980, and Willowbrook closed in 1987. Vaccinologist Maurice Hilleman called the studies the most unethical medical experiments ever performed on children in the United States. Dr. Krugman was never prosecuted. From Nazi concentration camps to American institutions, humanity has spent decades conducting experiments that reveal something dark about the pursuit of scientific progress at any cost. The methods varied. The lack of accountability didn't. Today, these cases form the foundation of modern medical ethics. Progress built on the backs of victims who never got justice. This isn't ancient history. This happened in our parents' lifetime. If you made it this far, thank you. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this, and let me know in the comments what stories you'd like to see next.